In opening government, from BBUA, Ionas Tuparu and Radu Corchea. In opening opposition, from Belgrade A, Helena Ivanov and Stefan Sirjansky. In closing government, from Lund A, Peer Klusendorf and Emilia Karlqvist. And in closing opposition, from Berlin A, Desislava Kurova and Kai Dittman. And the motion before the House is this House would, assuming it was technologically possible, remove the ability of soldiers to experience fear. Welcome to the final.
Test.
Sorry. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Madam Chair, we want our wars to be shorter and more effective, and we believe that the number of casualties in wars in general is too high at the moment. We believe that fear is an essential element that leads to bad decisions, to hesitations, and we know that one moment of hesitation makes the difference between life and death when you are on the battlefield. In my speech, I'm going to explain how fear leads to bad decisions and how this increases the chances of the war to be longer and less effective. I'm going to explain how fear impedes on war effort, and I'm going to explain why, by not doing this, we actually harm the dignity of soldiers, and why we have a duty to offer them a dignified death, instead of letting them die as cowards on the battlefield after they might have made bad decisions. Sorry. Before that, let's explain the model. We believe that, how are we going to do that? We believe that all soldiers during the war will be confronted with this mechanism by which we eliminate this feeling from all soldiers who have to go on the battlefield and who actually have to fight on the battlefield. Assuming this technology exists, of course, we also assume that this process is reversible. So at the end of the fight, they will get their feeling of fear back, because of course, we respect their right to fear. Also, we believe that, no, thank you. You said clarification? Yes. Yes. We believe that when soldiers go on the battlefield and accept to fight for their country, because they will know that this process will happen, they basically offer their implicit consent to this removal of fear. So we don't think that we actually impede their right not, if they don't want to be removed from this, from this feeling of fear to be removed, they will just not go to war. It's not like they have a right to go to war or something like that. Okay, firstly, why fear leads to bad decisions? We believe that when you are overwhelmed by emotions, when your brain is covered, when you have adrenaline pumping in your brain, when your hand is shaking on the gun, you get in a survival mode. This means that you are prone to ignore the rules of engagement. What are the rules of engagement? Are the rules that the generals, that those that are superior to the commandant, set as the rules that you have to follow as a unit, as a team, such as you don't fire until you're fired at, or you don't kill civilians. By the fact that you get into that survival mood, you are covered by fear, which means that you are prone to neglect those rules of engagement. Why is that wrong? Because rules of engagement have two purposes. First of all, to minimize collateral harms. When you are prone to neglecting the rules of engagement, you might fire at a civilian because you fear that he might shoot at you, even though you know that you shouldn't do that, because you are afraid that you will die. We believe that because you don't respect these rules of engagement, the risk of casualty is higher. Secondly, because these rules of engagement are written objectively. They are written by people who are there in their country, who are not actively participating in the war, and who can think strategically, long-term, about what the war is about, what are the implications of the war. B, they have all the big picture, not only what's happening on that particular battlefield, but also what's happening in that particular war, in the country, in the entire world. And thirdly, they can think about all aspects, such as they can make a cost-benefit analysis, because sometimes in a war, it may be worth sacrificing a unit for the whole, in order to win that war. No, thank you. So we believe that by neglecting these rules of engagement, you harm a lot the chances of a winning for that particular unit of that war. Secondly, fear impedes war effort because it makes you second-guess orders. We believe that listening to orders is essential. Why? Because every time you receive an order, you'll get it through your own filter of judgment now when you are covered by fear, instead of just doing it because your commander in chain told you, you have to do that because otherwise you will die, or your colleagues will die, or our country will lose this war, or will lose this battle. We believe that when you second-guess orders, this leads to hesitation, and in wars, only 1 second of hesitation is crucial and can define the result of that war. We want to eliminate this hesitation, and we want to eliminate any chance for that hesitation to happen. Fear leads to hesitation. Second point, we believe that it affects the dependence on the other. What's happening in war is that these people, soldiers, go there knowing that they might die, knowing that they might not never return to the ones they love, so they befriend other soldiers. You create this feeling of camaraderie, of friendship between the soldiers, of trust, which makes people trust in the other by the fact that they know that my chances of survival are higher if you also respect the same orders that I have to respect, because we trust our commander to take the best decisions so that our survival would be ensured, and the entire result would be better. Thirdly, the power of self-sacrifice. We believe that when you eliminate fear, this leads to acts of bravery. We believe that we need this in a war because this increases the efficiency of actions by the fact that you are more prone to doing the right thing, to be willing to die for your country, even though in other situations you might say, of course I don't want to die, I want to survive because I'm a human being. And B, this can inspire other soldiers to do the same thing, and other people, when you come back in your country and you are seen as a hero. It's important to preserve this feeling of self-sacrifice and to send them the message that they are dying for the greater good. Thirdly point, how it's important for the dignity of soldiers. Now people die covered in fear. Those that make mistakes, they're dying feeling fear of death, maybe feeling ashamed for what they've done. When you eliminate fear, when they're going to die, you're going to offer them a dignified death because they're no longer going to be covered by the fear of what's going to happen next. The only feeling that they're going to have is a feeling that they have done all that they could for their country by respecting the orders of their superiors, by respecting the trust in their comrades, in other soldiers, and we believe that we have this duty towards them to ensure them a dignified death in order to make them heroes for our country. Because we want shorter wars, because we don't want hesitations, and because we want to offer them a dignified death, please propose.
May I? Stanislav Petrov is a man who stopped World War III exactly because he hesitated and exactly because he was afraid that if he makes a bad decision, huge harms are going to be caused in our society. He got an information that Americans launched the nuke and the Russians should do the same. Exactly because he was afraid of consequences, he hesitated to do that, didn't do that, and stopped probably the worst conflict that we would have after World War III. Fear. Fear is the thing that rather than make you make bad decisions, Madam Chair, is the thing that stops you from making bad decisions and from causing even bigger harms than you can cause them. Also, when the opening government mentions the fact that we will always believe that soldiers gave their consent, that is questionable because often in wars we mobilize people and we do not ask them, do you want to be in war and do you want not to be afraid of what might happen to you? Also, what we want to say, which opening government forgets, we erase your fear, but we do not erase your hatred. We do not erase your anger. We do not erase the fact that you cannot stand the other side. And those will be the things, Madam Chair, that you will use. Those will be the emotions that will be included in the moment when you are making the cost-benefit analysis that opening government is talking about. We think that then your cost-benefit analysis is going to be even more harsh on the other side. Also, we think that whenever you have fear, that is the moment that stops you from breaking rules in war. Two reasons. Firstly, you're afraid what's going to happen to you if you break the rules. Are you going to be punished or are you going to get caught? Second thing, you're afraid that if you cause huge harms and you break huge rule, what's going to happen to your entire fellows in the army in case that you really made something bad? The thing that makes you break the rules, Madam Chair, is actually hatred. Every genocide that happened, which is the clearest example of rule breaking, happened exactly because people weren't afraid and because people hated too much. And you do not erase hatred by the case brought by the opening government. Four things from Belgrade today. Firstly, why we think that fear is basis of humanity. Second, why we think that fear influences us in your decision-making process. Thirdly, how we think wars will be even worse. Fourthly, what's going to happen to civilians. We think that fear and emotions are something that are intrinsic part of every human being. Everything that we've ever done was probably caused by fear. We created houses, food, arms, weapons, ways to survive because we were afraid that we were going to die. Once you take fear from people or any other emotion from people, you're making them being less humans. You're taking humanity away from them. We think that is preposterous because this is what you create. You create people that are means to an end and not means by themselves. You're saying to them, you're existing so you can serve to our own purposes, and you do not have the right to choose your own purpose and to have your own agency because we care about your efficiency, not about humanity that lies within you. We think that is preposterous and we have no right to do something like that. But even more importantly, let's talk about fear. Wars are awful, Madam Chair, and if we could, we would stop them all. But unfortunately, we can't. But we can make a world where less people die in those wars. We think that even though fear sometimes might be irrational, we think that is actually the only irrational emotion within the war that stops you from doing preposterous and awful things. Why? Because once you see someone dying in a very bad way on the battlefield, you get afraid. Can this happen to me? What is going to happen if I end up in this situation? And that is the moment where you start hesitating. hesitating. That is the moment where you want to step up from crossing the line because you're afraid of what might happen to you. That is exactly why we think that fear is good. Because once you have all other emotions included except fear, you're not going to be afraid what's going to happen to you if you go out and just shoot everyone you see in front of yourself. We think that exactly the fear of you being harmed in the end of that war, once you see all preposterous things happening during the war, is exactly the thing that stops you from doing the worst possible things that someone who only has anger and hatred and the idea of killing within himself is going to cause if you don't have the fear. But let's talk about more practical stuff, but before that, closing.
Right, but also in the modern world there are ways of removing fear. That's why a lot of war crimes are committed when people are drunk. That's why you give cocaine to soldiers in the First World War. Why won't they still be used?
Even if all the things that we are using right now can still be used, we think that even if you're a soldier on the cocaine, the fear sometimes might be the thing that stops you. Once you're not afraid, and I give you cocaine, and you're also full of hatred, there is literally nothing that can stop you from causing the biggest possible harm to the other side, because you're so much on adrenaline, and there is nothing behind in your brain saying you, oh my God, is this the right thing to do? Will something bad happen to me? Is this maybe too much? Because in that moment, you're just a machine. You're not a human being anymore that is driven by one of the strongest emotions any being has faced. Animals are also very important when it comes to fear. Every being on this planet did the most important things for themselves exactly because they were afraid of the fact that they were going to die. Instinct for survival and fear of death are two strongest emotions that any being on this planet has, and we are taking that from someone because we think that wars should be more efficient. Let's see what happens with wars. Once you have hatred and hatred as the only two emotions that are staying, we think that is going to be the moment where wars will become even more worse. Because now genocide is not going to be something that you are going to be afraid of committing. Because you don't care, are you going to die in that genocide? You don't care if the other side is going to be the one punishing you. You don't care if your general is going to punish you because you did something bad. We see that in Cold War. Exactly the fear was the thing that stopped people from going through Cold War, from getting into World War III, because they knew this is exactly the worst scenario that can happen to us. In a world where you have nukes, Madam Chair, in a world where you have such a serious weapon, the only thing that probably stops us from using that kind of weapon is exactly the fact that we are afraid if we use it, what is the other side going to do to us? Now you are removing that. Let's also talk about civilians. So in wars, we also often tolerate civilians. Firstly, because that's a rule general in war and we are afraid to break that rule. Secondly, because we're also afraid that if we do that to civilians of the other country, maybe someone is going to do that to the civilians of our country. But now that does not exist anymore. But the thing that does exist, except hatred, is your awareness as a soldier that as many civilians as you kill, the weaker the country gets. You know that is the efficient solution for you, to kill as much as people as possible, regardless are they soldiers or civilians, and therefore you will have bigger chances of winning that war. We think that is exactly the thing that probably is going to happen now. We think that politicians that usually tend to manipulate soldiers, even in the status quo, are going to misuse this even more, are going to push them even more to harm the other side in order for them to win. We think that in status quo we do not use chemical weapon because we are afraid of the huge consequences that can be caused to civilians. But once we are not afraid of those consequences, once we don't think about them, we're going to use every mean that we have in order to win this war, regardless the harms and regardless what's going to happen to the other side. Because we think that everyone should be treated as humans, because we think that fear stops us from making the worst possible decisions, and because we want as least possible dead peoples in war. Extremely proud to oppose this motion. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, we completely agree with the side of opposition when they say to you that fear is one of the strongest emotions that human beings can experience. It is because of the fact that it is such an intense feeling, we believe that you fundamentally lose control, which means that when you remove that out of the equation, you will achieve two things. You will achieve an efficiency of war, as my colleagues explained to you, which is important because that means that that war will not drag out and you will not have more lives lost. But secondly, it means that you are far less prone to commit acts of collateral damage, which will actually lead to a faster conflict solvency even after the war, because there is less resent over the civilians lost, and my analysis will explain why that happens. What I'm going to bring to you in my speech today is talk about the idea of accountability that is enforced by an objectification of war rather than being subjected to this fear, which is their strongest feeling, as they point out that you can be subjected to. And second, I'm going to be talking about post-war syndrome and how we're actually going to remove this and better integrate veterans within our societies after a war. But before that, a few points of rebuttal in terms of what we've heard from the previous speaker. She talks about hesitation and links that to MAD, right, to mutually assured destruction. The reality is that mutually assured destruction works on an objective basis as well. I'm not going to push that trigger, because if they do that as well, I will die. The reality is, it is me being irrational that is actually going to make me far likelier to push that button and not consider the fact that they might actually have rockets to shoot back at me as well, because it is such a strong emotion, right? Mutually assured destruction works exactly on an objective basis, which is exactly what we want to bring back into it. The other thing is that they keep on talking extensively about the fact that we're removing something core and fundamental to the human nature and the human body, right? Something that is intrinsically human, to quote them. Fundamentally, first of all, we're saying as part of our model, we're doing that temporarily anyway, and we're happy to do that. Secondly, if that part that makes us human makes us kill even more people, we're more than fine to remove that nature of ourselves, because we believe fundamentally if something is flawed in the human nature, it is okay to remove it out of the equation. But secondly, what you need to understand is they portray this world where fundamentally by doing this, we're using soldiers as a means to an end, right? Well, that is what war is. We're telling people go out there and die so that we benefit from the results of the war and winning as such as a society. That is not a harm of our model. That is the unfortunate nature of war to begin with. They talk about fear and link it to self-preservation, right? We fundamentally, and then they try to portray this idea of genocide. We believe that fundamentally all of those things are going to be achieved when you objectively follow the rules of engagement, because they're written strategically from an overview without the impact of emotions, right? That means that you are no longer purely reactive to the fear and to the scenarios in play, but rather to the objective setting that is written out specifically targeted to minimize both your own potential risk as well as the potential collateral damage. And the moment you have that objective, we believe that you are better off. But the most obscene point is this idea of a genocide, right? Because you engage in a genocide because you're afraid of everyone else. Madam Speaker, genocide means that I have a big rifle, bigger than everyone else, and I'm shooting at everyone that has no power to fight back. That is what genocide is. It is not led by fear, it is led by other unfortunate elements, right? They say, well, why don't you remove stuff like hatred and all of those other poor emotions when it comes to the human nature? First of all, they're buying into the idea that if there's negative aspects to the human nature we can remove. Secondly, I'm going to say, yeah, if the technology allows for it, maybe we should consider removing those as well. But thirdly, if we concede the fact that there's multiple aspects that are negative in the human nature that increase the damages of war, then removing one of those at least is still going to be beneficial to the end result of a war, and we're happy to go with that particular logic, right? Not yet. Why do we believe that we achieve accountability, right? And we're starting out from the very premise that they set up, which is that fear is one of the strongest emotions that the human body can actually go through, and the human brain loses its track and its focus when it is subjected to that. That is unfortunately the same narrative that courts tend to buy into, right? That is why fear is constantly used as an extenuating circumstance. That is why it is far less likely that someone who shoots a gun at a civilian out of a fear that he will die makes it legitimate for him to say, well, I was afraid for my own life, the conditions in the ground were horrific, and I can't be sanctioned for it, despite the fact that I committed a crime, basically, by killing an unprotected civilian. The moment you remove fear, you remove that extenuating circumstance, meaning that not only is it far less likely that that scenario will happen, but even when it does happen as a result of hatred or all of the other feelings that they want to talk about, then that person is far likelier that he will be sanctioned accordingly, right? right? We will remove that extenuating circumstance in that narrative that, I'm sorry, the situation was absolute crap, and I acted impulsively and instinctively, and I needed to protect myself.
Sir.
That is how you achieve accountability, and that is how you minimize collateral damage within a war, because people are acting and are known to be acting as objective agents in that particular war. I'll
Sir.
take closing.
We believe this technology already exists and is called extreme religion. Do you believe this leads to shorter and more efficient wars?
Extreme religion, assuming they're going into the rationale of put a bomb on your vest and goes out somewhere, is a call to action to do something stupid. What we're saying is we're giving you a mechanism whereby you minimize the chances of doing something stupid to begin with, because you're not subjected to those horribly strong emotions that you guys are talking about. We don't see the similarities there in terms of the negative impact. Post-war syndrome. We need to understand that soldiers on the ground are subjected to two aspects. It is a horrible fear, right? You hear these speeches about people living through trenches and the horrifying feeling that they have being constantly bombed. You hear veterans from Vietnam talking about the jungles and not knowing where bullets are coming from, right? That particular type of a fear, as well as the potential damages that they've done in killing civilians by accident because they were afraid for their own lives, are things that stay with these people after the war concludes. They stay with them after they come back home. They have nightmare over these things. They're haunted over these things, and they simply cannot adjust as a result of this particular thought because of the fact that they can't let these particular feelings go, right? Of both remorse as well as particular fear. And they're even harder for them to integrate into society because they are a means of an end as soldiers. They have been sent out there and they've experienced those things because of the society that has sent them there. And that is the same society that they're trying to reintegrate. A society that can't empathize with the horrific fear that they've gone through and the horrific things that they've done as a result of that fear. We believe that fundamentally when you remove fear, you remove both of these particular traumatic experiences that plagued our veterans, and we will ease their involvement after the conflict. Madam Speaker, we've showed you that you're minimizing the harms of a conflict, you're making it shorter, and you're minimizing collateral damage. But you're also reintegrating people that are involved in a war far better under our model. You need to propose.
Madam Chair, genocide is arguably a very efficient way to end a war, but it is not a just way. If they want efficiency, they will lead to worse outcomes in the long run. I will talk about how wars are necessarily always emotional, but how fear is one of the emotions which is good, and secondly, about how the self-interest created by fear leads to better outcomes. One, they tell us this will lead to bravery in warfare. One, why is bravery necessarily good? It often makes people make stupid decisions, which leads to them and their comrades getting killed. Two, we tell you that this often leads to the precise opposite to efficiency, because recognize that the respect for the command structure partly stems from the fact that you fear repercussions, say, martial courts, because if you break the rules. This makes armies less functional because soldiers are often less likely to respect their commanders because they feel no fear. Two, they tell us mutually assured destruction did not precisely happen because of an objective calculus. Yes, but fear contributed to that objective calculus because it made people more rational. The people who were at Checkpoint Charlie probably hated each other, but the fear of what will happen if they shoot at each other stopped them from doing precisely that. No, thank you. Three, they tell us genocide does not happen because of fear, it happens because of other things. Yes, precisely our point. But because we have fear, it often leads to genocide not happening because you think the other side could sometimes do the very same to you. Recognize that those things happen in, say, Rwanda, precisely because they knew that the other side could never get back to them. True, they were wrong, but precisely because of the lack of fear, they completely dehumanized and attacked the other side. For, they tell us, soldiers are always a means to an end. To this we tell you, false. The reason why we often say respect the rights of prisoners of war is because we value each one of them as human beings. We do not allow killing of unarmed civilians. We do not allow the killing of unarmed soldiers, precisely because we respect them as human beings. We do not test chemicals on humans precisely because we value them as means in themselves. They simply cannot claim that point. Then they tell us, lastly, yes, but this helps post-war syndrome. One, recognize that the model they set means that they will revert this back, so they will feel fear again when they come back from the war. So you can feel fear of, oh my God, I killed so many civilians. Will they get back at me for that? But two, the memories they're talking about still remain with you. Sorrow for the comrades that were killed remain with you. Chemicals, which are often in weapons that you use, which cause huge mental damage to you, remain with you. They do not get rid of those things on their side of the house. What do I want to say now? That wars are always necessarily emotional because of the very context in which they're happening. You do not necessarily know what will happen to you tomorrow. You see the other side often killing your friends, your comrades. You do not know whether people who you share a barracks with will be there in bed tomorrow. You have a lot of anger, a lot of hatred towards the other side, a lot of sorrow for comrades that have fallen. What is the issue with these emotions? These are emotions which lead to you wanting to be worse to the other side, that lead you to wanting to destroy the other side. Now recognize that in this calculus of emotions, which are often in war, fear is also a very important one. But what we tell you on our side of the house is that at the moment when you exclude fear, these emotions have a far bigger impact on your decision-making process. So what does that mean? That means precisely what they talk about. Accountability will be even lesser because you will not fear consequences if you kill POWs. You will not fear consequences if you kill enemy civilians. You will not fear consequences if you commit the worst atrocities. We tell you that these things make war far worse. We tell you that these things precisely lead to genocide and to more civilians killed. Go for it, opening.
Okay, the fear of death, which leads to hesitation, will always be more stringent than the fear of a martial court because death is imminent. The martial court is there in a long distance place and in long-term away.
Okay, what we want to tell to that point is that we can concede that in some situations, hesitation leads to casualties which would have not otherwise happened. But we don't think that point is necessarily a comparative one because hesitation also often leads to casualties not happening. Say if the Blackwater soldiers at Fallujah hesitated for a moment rather than attacking the car that was approaching, that could have perhaps led to them not killing those individuals. Now, why is self-interest so important in warfare? Because we tell you that fear essentially stems from the fact that you do not want your life destroyed and that you fear for your own life. It is essentially an emotion which leads to self-preservation. Why do we think that self-preservation is good? Because then you are less likely to do things which will endanger your self-preservation. If all soldiers have this emotion, they're less likely to do things which will lead to them being killed. This is precisely the main point of our case. We recognize that sometimes war are necessary. We tell you that it would be a far preferable world if they did not happen. But because of the need for self-preservation, you're less likely to engage in the most atrocious acts which can happen. You're less likely to want to kill the other side or to commit genocide. Recognize that in World War II, even though it was an atrocious conflict, chemical weapons were not used between militaries for fear that the other side would use them as well. The balance of fear which exists between armies stops them from doing the worst things to each other. Once you remove fear from the calculus, the only things that remain are hatred and our anger. It removes your capacity to care about your own self, and it leads to you committing things which can lead to other people getting killed far more and you getting killed as well in the long run. Even if that makes war efficient, or more efficient, say shorter, it leads to far more people being killed in the long run. We don't think that's acceptable. Madam Chair, what have we shown to you today? We tell you that the truth, sometimes hesitation and fear can lead to bad decisions. But on a comparative, the decisions they lead to are far worse. The emotions that exist in war do not go away. The emotions that stay there are precisely the ones that make us scale. Fear does not lead to genocide, but anger and hatred do. We want less of these things happening. Very proud to oppose.
So the question we should ask ourselves is when humans react best, when they're rational or emotional, fear-based. We think this falls on our side of the house. For once, I only have one extension, but with 6 subpoints, where we talk about the idea that fear will still persist under the model, will still need mechanisms to overcome this fear, and all of those mechanisms that states use in policies to overcome fear are significantly worse by simply removing that. So let's do 2 points of rebuttal. So first of all, dangerous situations can still be assessed. If you're a rational being, you can still think that the situation is off, that there are a larger group of people than usual, that they have different types of arms and different types of gatherings. So you can still assess situations and still be a rational actor in war and still be an effective soldier without fear. Secondly, they bring up nukes. That's a very strong point. The question behind those nukes is, will it really be stopped? Because the only argument they give us that fear stops you. 2 things. A, compassion stops you in a lot of cases. We'll tell you where their policy often, thank you very much, is something that contributes to less compassion because it encourages mechanisms that reduce compassion within those soldiers. Secondly, we reject the idea that if you don't have fear, you no longer have a wish to live. We think it's an absurd characterization that fear is the only thing that keeps me alive. That's also the wish of experiencing pleasure later on, seeing my family again, a lot of positive information, positive emotions that makes me want to continue to live. That's very positive and very harmful. And if you can make the rational calculus that if I kill prisoners of war, if I torture people, if I make that attack, the US will finally decide to intervene in my country and stop us after the massacre of Srebrenica. That's a rational calculus you can make, and that is something that stops people also from doing those things. We think you're perfectly capable of making the rational calculus of wanting to experience pleasure again, of wanting to lead a normal life again, and not wanting retaliation that causes your life. That means nuking will still be stopped, genocides can still be stopped. Note also one fundamental flaw of their policy. Rwanda didn't have opening governments mechanism, yet the genocide still happened. So the entire idea that genocides are based on lacking fear, when those people in Rwanda are equally human and equally capable of experiencing fear, is completely false. Now let's look into the real-life scenario of why this is bad. Because what happens with fear? So we acknowledge fear happens under each model for each humans, but states will still want to engage in wars. There are valid reasons, or very, very non-valid reasons, why generals, state officials, politicians want to engage in wars. What happens now? They realize their soldiers are capable of experiencing fear, and they need to develop policy mechanisms of how to overcome that fear. We hear an opening debate that talks about why some individual decisions are good, some individual decisions are bad. We tell you why it leads to general policies on a general structural political level that ultimately and overall will lead to more casualties and more harm for civilians. 6 subpoints. Distance to them, blanket quick reaction policies, drugs, extreme nationalism, extreme religion, thank you Kai, and extreme hatred, dehumanization of people. Why is that the case? because they want them to keep on going to spread fear. So what do? If you know that your soldier experiences fear when they get too close, when they fear they're being personally targeted, you create mechanisms that make them less fearful. For example, not doing close-level bombing where you have a higher chance of being A, accurate, and B, capable of assessing if it's a valid target, but rather bomb from a higher distance. We think that leads people to having higher casualties. Those are rational decisions made by politicians and generals because they know their soldiers will experience fear. They will rebel against those actions. They will not engage in those missions or will fail in those missions because they're fearful. We enable them to have those missions. Taking away fear means extending military possible options. We think that's positive. Secondly, if you're fearing things, that also means your information shut down. You're in fight or flight mode, and there are clear psychological reactions to you that make you reduce the information you take in to only the most vital ones as you perceive it. Unfortunately, your body is very bad at assessing what those vital information are. That's why we overreact to fear, for example, when someone draws a wallet and we assume it's a gun. Those are situations when civil conflicts for soldiers in civil areas and guerrilla warfare escalate wars by assuming that people are exactly violent or possessing of guns when in reality they don't because they shut down information. Thirdly, as I told you in my POI, in the First World War you used cocaine, you have people under drugs. There are very strong incentive for soldiers under the current status, whether in developed or non-developed countries, to be put under circumstances where they have drugs and therefore shut out some fear. Now they rightfully say the fear will still persist. That's true. That means you have fear and are at the same moment under drugs that harm it somewhat, but also makes you more likely to go crazy, more likely to overstep those boundaries. That's why you look into Indonesia and how most of the war crimes were committed when soldiers were heavily drunk and no longer having all those inhibitions of stopping you. They were fearful, but also under situations where they overstep boundaries, and that was actively encouraged policies by those militias or governments. Next point, extreme nationalism. Even if we buy the point that heroism is bad, bravery is bad, if that's true, then fear is a really terrible idea, because if you remove fear, you make a more rational calculus of being in control. You're not buying into the idea of extreme nationalism, because what do governments do? If they want you to fight in their war, even they know you will be fearful. They need to incentivize you to still do it. One incentive you have is strong nationalism of saying, you're fighting for your country, you're so incredibly brave, you're keeping our existence up, you need you to protect you. That's when you want to become a hero. That's when you want to overstep boundaries and eradicate a large number of people, because that's what makes you a hero. And those are things that are incentivized for states, because they want you to feel this extreme nationalist idea. Before that,
Taking fear might cause soldiers doing something they otherwise wouldn't if they were afraid. Who's going to be responsible on trials after the war crimes have been committed?
well, hopefully the leaders, which is exactly what happens, and they're the ones causing those problems under most circumstances. So the whole idea of nationalism, it creates the sentiment of superiority, which is exactly feeding into the idea that you feel nothing will happen. That's because you feel my nation is superior. You've been told numerous times by your leaders how superior you are, how you will win this war, definitely. That's when you don't fear the rational calculus of retaliation. Extreme religious groups, if you feel you will be the martyr, if you kill many people, you will go to heaven. Again, you encourage religious leaders to feed into the narrative, overcome fear, be a religious martyr. That's so much more worthy. That shapes societal structures that affect soldiers, but also the society in general. That makes reconciliation harder, but that also creates conflicts in the long run. If you have several religious, more and more radicalized extreme groups, they're significantly more likely of engaging in war later on, therefore causing more war. Lastly, extreme hatred, dehumanization. If you fear something that keeps you going is that the other side is so vicious, so terrible, that you need to eradicate them first. That's when politicians tell you about how they rape our women under evil monsters, and the soldiers then go out to retaliate, to hate them, and then commit genocides, and then overstep the boundaries because they lose sight that those people are humans too. We want to take away that incentive and directly remove fear. That means more humane wars and a better world. Thank you very much.
you still hear me? Yes, good. You can hear me? You sure? Is this better? Okay. Madam Speaker, what we bring you from second opposition in this debate is two extension points. First of all, I'm going to talk about post-war narratives and why we think they're very important to have, and how we, as Western democracies, have only been able to become more humane, to be engaged in less wars because we had awful narratives from soldiers coming home telling us about that. Second point of extension is going to be why we think it's in the absolute interest of democratic states to not go with this proposal, both if they want to do better in war, and secondly also if they want to be able to use their soldiers, as first government said, and said we have to be able to use them, and so on and so forth, why we think it is not in the state's interest that is fighting a war to do that, because it diminishes the ability to fight good and proper wars. Before that, first of all, a point of clarification on first government, and second of all, rebuttal to the extension we just heard. First of all, on first government, we think they contradict themselves in a lot of the points that they bring forward, because in some points they say, you know what, if you don't have fear, you can react much faster. Then they say if you react too fast, you commit atrocities. Then they say if you have fear, you second guess the commands that you get. Now you can act faster, but if you act fast, then you're more likely to commit genocide because you don't see the humanity of the other side. We think this is a little bit of a contradiction. You can either have the one or you can have the other one. You can't have both and just say, you know, in one instance it will play out like this, but in the other instance it will actually play out the other way. We think that is not that easy as you claim here. Also, we heard enough rebuttal on you from first opposition. That's why I would like to move on to the extension that we just heard here. There is one mistake in the analysis that Per just brought you, and that is the question, who decides whether we go to war or not, and who needs nationalism and who needs to feel hatred. It is not the soldiers that decide that. So taking it away from the soldiers during combat will not change anything, and we won't have any of the wonderful positive effects under your 8 sub-points that you tried to bring us. Because generals, first of all, do not make the decisions. So, first of all. Second of all, it is politicians that make the decisions based on how the citizens and the population feels. If you think of World War I, everyone was war crazy. Artists, intellectuals, the whole population, the politicians. Taking away fear from soldiers in a situation like that doesn't change anything of what he talked about. It doesn't change any of the mechanisms that he talked about, because that is still possible. You can still incite fear, you can still incite nationalism in the larger audience. The politicians can still feel that, so that is not changing anything, the reasons why we go to war, and all the negative things are still possible under what you just said here. Let me talk about narratives first. And this is a point I would like to make where we accept what first government told you. We accept that everything is going to be beautiful, like Deputy Prime Minister said, they come home, there is no trauma, which I'm going to contradict in my second point, because we believe that is still going to happen, because you still have memories, and that is the basis for trauma. But let's assume that it is that easy as he points it out here, and we have no trauma, no fear, no bad memories of what happened under war. We lose the only witnesses to what happens in war and to all the ugly things that happen in war. If you go to the museum here of Croatian history and you look at the wonderful paintings that propaganda artists painted during World War I that were put there by the government, then you see only nice pictures of war. You see camaraderie, you see the soldiers next to the sea. You never see awful pictures. But if you think of the progression that we've made in the past, it was always, especially after World War I, where everyone was thinking, is this going to be wonderful, it's going to be a quick war, it's going to be a successful war, and we're going to be proud and brave. But then they went to war and actually saw what war meant. Now, if we imply and accept what first government says and accept the mechanism and the outcome, we say this is nothing a democratic state should want, because we need to have this discussion after war. We need to know how we fought the war, if we actually fought it the way that we said we would fight, if we stuck to our principles and to the human rights we wanted to uphold during through our soldiers and so on and so forth. We will not have that critical narrative and this critical telling of what actually happened if we take that away and the mechanism works. That's why we think it is bad, because we think as Western democracy, so we want to have less wars and we want to have more human wars. In order for us to be able to improve that, we need to understand what goes wrong and what actually happens during war, because there are no journalists, except maybe embedded ones, that are also controlled what they get to tell in the media. That's why we think it is absolutely against the interest of a democratic society that wants to move in the way that it has taken 60 years ago, 70 years ago, and that is absolutely hindering it. Before I go to the second point, first, quick.
Talk about using soldiers as a means to end. You would rather have them traumatized coming back, ignoring the fact that you get all of the benefits that you're talking about, because they will have the factual memories of what war is all about.
Okay. Now you contradict yourself, and we actually agree with you, because we think this is something that would rather actually happen. Because yes, you still have the memories. And now I would like to talk about my second point. Before I come to that, first something else. The wars that we fight today, if you look at them, what kind of a war is the US fighting in Iraq? What kind of a war is Israel fighting in the Gaza Strip? It is insurgency wars, where our soldiers have to go on the ground and fight like on the streets and in house battles. The worst thing that can happen in these wars that we mostly fight right now is for a soldier to being captured and being taken by the other side. You lose the war in the media as a state if you see your soldier being captured, like the one that was decapitated 2 days ago. This is the worst thing for you as a state if your soldier is taken and instrumentalized, and rightly so, because your population doesn't want to see their soldiers and their sons dying. We say if you experienced fear in such extreme situations, in a dark street in the night somewhere where you don't know what is happening, where you don't know the surrounding, this is the one thing that will prevent you from getting into an extremely dangerous situation and being actually captured and then having all these negative effects that I just talked about. It is not in the interest of a state to make it more likely for its soldiers to become captured, lose the war on the national front, because it is now in the media and we see, oh God, we're losing our soldiers, they're dying, he's being decapitated, and everyone can watch it on YouTube. This is highly detrimental and awful for states, democratic states fighting wars, when the population basically says we don't want to go on because it is too dangerous, we're losing our own citizens. And the last idea is the trauma. You will have soldiers that come back and then remember what they did, with the fear now back in their emotional, feeling the fear again. How are they supposed to put this together, what they did in war and the way that they feel right now? We think this creates more trauma and more psychological problems, and it makes it less likely for soldiers being able to be sent back into battle. For both those reasons, it is not in the state's interest to do this to its soldiers, and that's why we say we should oppose. Thank you.
Did I forget a paper? Sorry. So, welcome to the World's ESL Final 2.0. We're all seeing each other again. So, what I'm going to do today is first clarify what happens on the status quo, then look into the nature of fear. After that, I'll be looking at what actually happens in terms of policy shaping, the extension pairs bring out, and how we shape wars and why they're more brutal with the actual mechanism in place in status quo. First, a few points of rebuttal to the earlier speaker. She characterized it as if people in general seem to be generally war crazy, that they're pushing for it, that they want to go out in war. Our response to this is that people in themselves are not war crazy. There's no inherent reason for people to want to go to war. The fact that they do that in most cases is because governments influence them and they influence public opinion and they push them out to that. What PAR brings you in extension is the fact that they have to overcome fear when it comes to war, spurs nationalist ideas, and this is what pushes people into the actual war crazy situations that they are in and spurs them in actual sense. And that thing, we don't think that point stands. We also heard from Desi in her extension. If there's no trauma and no fear, you'll have no narrative, so people will not be deterred from wars in the long run. I think that people can pretty much be deterred from war even without having experienced the actual fear. Why is that? Because people can, even without the mechanism of fear, recognize sad things haven't happened. They can have compassion, they can have sadness, they can have rationality, or they can have basic inner moral compasses having seen bad things. If you'd see a picture of Srebrenica, we do generally believe you would be sad of the acts you see, even if you don't feel the exact fear of people in that position. So we don't think the idea of post-war narratives not existing would actually stand. After that, we heard about the trauma that individual soldiers would face post-traumatic stress. We do generally say, of course, removing fear does not remove all post-traumatic stress from these soldiers, but on the comparative, these individual soldiers are less traumatized in the long run if you remove the fear in the actual war situation. Why is that? When you're in a war situation, you'd have a fight or flight mode, the two states that you in a medical perspective can enter. You'd be in your fight mode. That's an increased stress level in your body. That's not a natural state of being in. Doing that for a prolonged time takes a toll physically on you, but also in the long run mentally on you. We remove one aspect out of post-traumatic trauma by moving this constant state of fear that you've been in. Yes, there'll still be sadness. Yes, you'll still have seen bad things. But on the comparative, not having fear, not having the physical and psychological pressure makes it comparatively better on that side of the house. First then, let's look at status quo. What do we actually see here? We're generally saying that soldiers and wars do exist. People will still go to war even if you'd have fear. But we do say, all wars, you'll need a proxy mechanism to overcome fear. Our extension in this side of the house, it's saying all these proxies that you do take into status quo to avoid the fear, that's a natural aspect of war. All of them are worse or directly causing harms that are directly worse than by actually implementing technology. What these proxies are, it's distance, it's blankets policies, usually very aggressive, it's drugs or substance abuse by soldiers in there, it's extreme nationalism, extreme hatred or dehumanization put to place, and extreme religion also. These mechanisms are already in place to overcome the fear. There's a natural aspect of war, and each of them are so entailed with harms and dangers that we believe on the comparative, the fact of implementing technology and avoiding this is better off in that sense. First issue, nature of fear. What we do is concede to opening opposition is the strong aspect of humanity, but there seems to be different characterizations on two sides of the house of what this fear makes you actually do. We're saying it generally makes you overreact, and why is that? We're looking at the nature of conflict zones. What do they naturally entail most times? You're under massive psychological pressure, physical pressure, carrying around all your equipment. You have a time pressure on you. You can't just wander around with an open target, you have to make fast decisions. You're under an extreme threat many times, at least under the perception that you are under a threat because you've been told that you're fighting an enemy. We believe that this makes people more naturally overreact and take decisions based on fear that are not rational, but are directly believing in the idea that you're defending yourself in doing so. What opening gov, though, characterized, opening opposition, they said, no, fear stops you from doing bad things. And the reason is that you'd fear future consequences if you commit war crimes. We're generally saying, in the characterization that war happens in, people are more likely, or soldiers are more likely, to look at the short-term perspective of this perceived threat and the perceived aggressiveness of the actual situation, the potential future long run of maybe ending up in war court. So we're not saying in that sense, if you remove fear, as opening opposition says, hate, the only thing that's left is hatred. We don't think so. People are complex, they're compassionate, they're moral, they have a set of facts and knowledge, and they might have spirituality that stops them from doing certain things also. So we don't believe that by removing fear that it would be worse. We just believe it would be better because you'd react on rationality, you take other aspects into account. I'll take opening.
You say soldiers will feel better in post-war time because I don't know what. How do you think they will feel once they realize we've done something what we otherwise wouldn't do because someone took fear away from us?
What?
You take the fear. Soldier does something he otherwise wouldn't do. How does he feel once the war is over, once he realizes he did something he wouldn't do?
Our analysis is that fear is what makes people overreact. The fear itself is what makes people overdo things. Removing fear won't make people overreact. It will make them look at aspects of their personality. Compassion, logic, reasoning, for example, and we think that's a pretty good thing when you're going to war. But also then, what happens to the nature of warfare if we do remove fear? As Paz says, okay, there might be a balance of fear to some degree, and some fear might stop some wars. But the fact that when you actually go to war, the fact that you have fear there in the first place shapes the policies that you do set out, and these are massively harmful for several reasons. They not only affect the soldiers, but they affect societies in the long run by making them be more plausible to vote for wars, to encourage people to go for wars, to encourage people to enlist. Why are these, for example? Well, to generally motivate people to overcome the fear, you have to make wars feel useful. You incite extreme nationalism, saying that you are fighting for something that's bigger than yourself and our nation is more worthy. You demonize the opponent, saying that it's worthy to go in combat with them, it's worthy to take out it. Even if you have slight fear, you're fighting for such a higher purpose that it's worth facing these fears to overcome it for something greater. We also believe that leads to blanket policies that set out and facilitate quick reactions, as shoot if you're a bit afraid, don't take a second guess, don't let your comrades ever be in a threatful situation. It also makes a shape of policy that distances the people from the actual war actions that they do carry out. Instead of having closer bombing that could be more precise and more targeted, you put yourself at a distance, but that because you don't want the soldiers to actually fear the consequence of what you're doing. And that means more imprecise wars, more harmful wars, and in the long run, you'd have more nationalist feelings, more religious feelings, if that's Kerry wants to argue, or religious extremism. And that's what in the long run leads to more brutal wars, more harmful wars, and therefore we're very happy to oppose or propose.
Fear is the feeling that failing matters. This is the overall idea of fear. The idea that you can be afraid of something that you before that didn't understand necessarily. What we are bringing you from Closing Opposition today is the idea that fear and the fear of soldiers is necessary to shape democracies and to prevent all the harms that Closing Opposition wanted to bring us. We believe nationalism and religious extremism are there and cause that actually there will be no fear. They are not there to reduce fear. The religion was there before the idea of taking away fear. Nationalism was there before taking away the fear. It is not the means to an end. It is the end. Nationalism is the strong idea of China, believing that they are superior. The whole population believes this. The whole population of the US chants USA, USA. They did it 2 days ago. Why did they do that? Did they do it to overcome fear? No, they didn't do it to overcome fear. They are doing it because they are proud, because they believe this is the right thing to do, even though we Germans don't think that. The idea there is that we believe that modesty and the idea of strong nationalism is a bad thing, yes, but it is not there to prevent fear. It leads to fearlessness, which is bad at the end. We also believe that cocaine might not be a good idea in war, so. Besides that, what we want to tell you is firstly the idea, will we have actually better wars if both sides are fearless? Or if just one side is fearless. Secondly, what does it mean if we are saying a soldier is a means to an end? We debaters always say that, but there is a meaning, an idea behind that. So firstly, will we have better wars? Will we have better wars is the idea on the one side that we are saying, yeah, they are more rational, therefore it is good. The other side is basically saying, yeah, the only thing that is left is anger and the fear of court ruling. We believe that none of that is just necessarily the truth alone. We believe that when Per is talking about compassion, there's a German translation for this. This is Mitgefühl, feeling together with someone, which means at the end of the day that I can feel the fear of someone else. This is the idea of empathy, and this is what you lose as well when you are losing fear for your own. And you lose the fear as well before yourself, that you are saying, I was afraid of myself, of what I did, what I become, what I got at the end of the day. Therefore, we don't necessarily believe that it leads to better wars if you are a fearless warrior. If you are one fearless warrior, you might have a nice TV show, but that doesn't mean at the end of the day that this makes a good army. Just imagine you being a civilian in front of 20 fearless soldiers. Would you feel more secure or less secure? Probably less, because you think feelings don't matter to this person that much. Feelings are not important for him to make decisions. It's just a rational calculus. I'm just a number. I'm just a number on another side. And when you know how many civilians Israel killed in the Gaza Strip, then you know what this numbers means to a state if you are a rational actor. So we believe that there can be actually the possibility that you are saying, yeah, it is rational to say, I kill those people because I don't have this compassion, this fear of myself, this fear of feeling the fear of the other person. We therefore believe that at the end of the day, it won't lead to better wars. We see this in reality as well. After 3 years of the Syrian war, do you really believe that the people are still as afraid as in the beginning of killing other people? We don't believe that. We believe that you get apathetic. We believe that you are getting just stronger if you get fearless. That doesn't make you a better warrior. That doesn't make you a better human being. And sometimes human beings are better warriors because they take the other side into account. Opening.
You're ignoring our analysis according to which when you do not have fear, i.e. are trigger happy to protect your own life, you will objectively follow the rules of engagements written out by people outside of the battlefield who benefit from having all of the emotions that you talk about as being necessary, including empathy.
We don't know if this is necessarily good. In Germany, we have the idea that you as a soldier have a responsibility as well. It is not just following orders. Following orders usually led to the most severe war crimes. We don't know that this is always a good thing to say, I was just following orders. And this is what you are claiming. This is what you are claiming makes a good soldier. Just following orders. We don't believe this on the opposition side. We actually think that, yeah, sacrificing yourself sometimes might be a good thing in a war, but not today. And this is what we brought you as well in extension. And this is my second point. The media idea and that the individual matters more. When we see Foley, the journalist, being captivated, and it runs 24/7 on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, then it matters. If we see that one soldier in Israel is traded for 1,000 Palestinians, one soldier matters. And it keeps you away from those situations, from going into the dark alley alone, because you are now fearless. And this is a protection mechanism that we believe is very useful in today's media society, where an individual can be more important than the calculus of war, than the reasons why we went to this war, than the idea of staying out of war for this. One individual can matter today in a century where we just believe pictures that are emotionalized. Therefore, we think this doesn't lead to a better decision calculus for the population at all. And this is my last point. No, thank you, Per. My last point is the idea that we believe that the narrative matters that people are saying. When we are looking at Guernica, when we are reading The Naked and the Death, we can see the full show of horror, of the attacker as well as the defender. Not just the civilians, but soldiers as well. The idea that we see that people are afraid, that people got killed, that we have compassion by both sides, that we have the idea war is a horrible thing at the end of the day. If we assume that actually we will have less PMS at the end of the day, then we think this matters to a society to break all the ideas that Per had, to break the idea of nationalism, to break the idea of extremism, to show that it is a bad thing to do this because you are afraid, because you are compassionate, because you can see the fear of the other side as a soldier as well. Soldiers going into another country are the only people often in a country who witnessed this war and who can come back. No other person knows what it was like in Southeast Asia during the Second World War except for the soldiers being there. We need them to be afraid, to actually break down the USA, and come to the idea that we have a society where we believe that war is the worst thing that can happen to a society, that it's not just a calculus, but the horror of a generation and generations to come. This is the idea that we had in Afghanistan. We had 30 years of ongoing war because our side didn't care for war, because the US never had a home front, because the UK never had a home front. Those were the countries going to war there because they didn't know what war actually meant. France and Germany stayed out of those wars for good reasons. And those reasons were that, that the people and the population knew what it meant to be in war. Not just the idea of war, not just talking about it, but feeling the fear, feeling the anger, feeling everything that is bad about war in your own skin. We just can give this away when we believe that soldiers need to have fear. If soldiers don't have fear, we have no one to tell us how horrible war is for the other side. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
All right. First of all, one last round of applause for all the ESL finalists. Congratulations. Secondly, in 15 to 20 minutes time, the open final is going to start here. I would like to ask the teams in the open final to meet us here on the stage now, and the panelists and the chair of the open final to meet us here in a few minutes time. So 15 to 20 minutes break.